The light from the projector cast a sharp, sterile glow over the boardroom, illuminating Lucy's face as she delivered the final blow. "And that," she said, her voice pulsing with a practiced, breathless excitement, "is how I restructured the entire architectural framework for the Q3 expansion. It was a grueling 3 months of solo research, but I believe the results speak for themselves." The board members nodded, their pens scratching across expensive notepads. Lucy stood there, the literal center of attention, basking in the warm hum of unearned praise. She didn't look back at me. To her, I was just a ghost in the machine, the collaborator who had provided the heavy lifting while she prepared the victory lap. She thought my composure was a sign of surrender. She thought my silence was permission. I sat in the shadows at the back of the room, the leather of the executive chair cool against my back. I didn't feel the heat of embarrassment or the sting of tears. I simply rotated my wrist, checking my Cartier watch. 10:14 a.m. The presentation had 3 minutes left. I looked at the screen, at the specific geometric patterns and data clusters that had taken me 16-hour days to perfect. Every line of code, every aesthetic choice, every financial projection was mine. Lucy hadn't just erased my name. She had attempted to colonize my intellect. She miscalculated. I wasn't waiting for her to finish so I could complain. I was waiting for her to reach the highest point of her lie so the fall would be terminal. I stood up. The sound of the heavy chair rolling back on the hardwood was the first shot of the war. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The room didn't go quiet immediately. There was a lingering buzz of approval as Lucy began to gather her notes, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She didn't expect me to move. In her mind, I was the safe partner, the one who preferred the quiet of the studio to the glare of the boardroom. She had spent the last 12 weeks mistaking my professional composure for a lack of ambition, and my focus for a lack of sight. She was wrong. I wasn't quiet because I was shy. I was quiet because I was documenting. As I walked toward the front of the room, I felt a familiar, icy clarity settle over me. In this industry, there is a specific brand of theft that often goes unpunished because it's disguised as synergy. People like Lucy don't see themselves as thieves. They see themselves as editors. They believe that because they can present an idea better than the person who created it, the idea belongs to them. They think the person in the background is a tool to be used, then discarded once the real work of credit-taking begins. I stopped at the edge of the mahogany table. The CEO, a man who valued precision above all else, looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. Lucy's smirk faltered, her hand pausing over her laptop. She tried to maintain her composed mask, but I could see the first flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the sudden realization that the ghost had stepped out of the shadows. I didn't look at her. Looking at her would imply that we were equals in this moment. We weren't. I was the architect, and she was the squatter. I wasn't there to argue, to plead, or to ask for my name to be added to a slide. I was there to reclaim the territory she had tried to settle. I had spent years being the collaborator who got left behind. Those years were over. The coldness in my veins didn't come from nowhere. It was a scar. 3 years ago, at my previous firm, I was the definition of a team player. I believed in the collective win. I spent 6 months developing a sustainable urban housing model that was projected to save the firm $12 million in material costs. I shared everything: my source code, my early sketches, my raw data, with a senior partner named Marcus. I thought we were collaborating. When the project went to the international board, Marcus presented it as his magnum opus. He stood on a stage in London while I watched the live stream from my cubicle in New York. He didn't just take the credit. He took the promotion I had been promised. When I confronted him, he patted my shoulder with a patronizing grin and said, "Don't be so emotional. We're a team, and the team won. Your name is in the fine print of the appendix." I checked. The appendix was a 40-page document of legal jargon. My name was on page 38, listed under Internal Research Support. I didn't quit that day. I stayed for 3 more months, watching Marcus collect a $250,000 performance bonus while I struggled to pay off my student loans. I watched him be interviewed by architectural digests, using my metaphors to describe his vision. That was the moment I realized that in this industry, collaboration is often a predatory tactic. It is a word used by the talentless to gain access to the vaults of the gifted. When I joined this firm, I made a silent vow. I would never be the support again. I would be the foundation. I began a habit that Lucy mistook for obsessive compulsiveness. Every time I opened a file, I created a digital trail. I used a third-party timestamping service that logged every save, every edit, and every keystroke to an external encrypted server. I didn't save my work on the shared drive until it was finished. I kept my joint sessions with Lucy strictly verbal on my end, while I recorded our meetings under the internal quality assurance clause of my contract. Lucy entered the picture 6 months ago. She was high energy, socially dynamic, and had a resume that was remarkably light on technical achievements, but heavy on strategic leadership. The partners loved her. They thought pairing my technical brilliance with her marketable personality would create a powerhouse team. "We're going to be a duo," Lucy told me during our first week, leaning over my desk and flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You do the math, I do the magic. We'll be unstoppable." I watched her over the following months. She was a master of the social harvest. She would sit in my office, sipping a latte, asking innocent questions about my structural choices. "Oh, tell me more about how you solved the weight-bearing issue in the Q3 model," she'd say, her pen poised over a notebook that was mostly doodles. "I want to make sure I represent your hard work correctly when we talk to the higher-ups." She wasn't learning the work. She was learning the script. She was harvesting the vocabulary of my genius so she could parrot it back to people who didn't know the difference. She saw me as a library she could loot. She assumed that because I didn't brag, I didn't care about the credit. She assumed that because I was a woman who stayed composed, I was a woman who was content to be a footnote. She didn't know that every time she left my office with a harvested idea, I went back to my computer and logged the exact time and date of the conversation. I noted the specific phrases she borrowed. I was building a case, not a collaboration. By the time we reached the final month of the project, Lucy had stopped even pretending to contribute. She spent her days in pre-briefings with the CEO's assistants, building social capital, while I spent my nights in the CAD software, ensuring the architecture was flawless. She thought she was winning the marathon because she was already standing at the finish line, waiting for me to carry her across it. She was about to find out that the finish line was a trap. To catch a thief, you have to make them feel like the owner. Over the final 8 weeks of the project, I didn't just allow Lucy to take the lead in our internal check-ins. I encouraged it. I fed her summaries of my research that were designed to be incredibly easy to memorize, but impossible to defend. I gave her the highlights, the flashy buzzwords, and the high-level conclusions. I was effectively training her to believe that my intellect was a tap she could turn on and off whenever she needed to look brilliant. I became the ultimate composed partner. When she would say, "I'll handle the executive summary for the partners," I would simply nod and say, "That makes sense, Lucy. You have such a way with words." I saw her confidence transform into something closer to arrogance. She stopped even asking for the raw data files. Why would she need the messy, complicated spreadsheets when she had me to distill them into 5-minute talking points? She began to treat our joint sessions as her own private coaching lessons. She would sit across from me, her legs crossed, checking her own reflection in the darkened screen of her laptop, while I explained the structural integrity of the new framework. "You're so good at the boring stuff," she once said, laughing as she scribbled a note about aesthetic fluidity over my complex stress test results. "It's a talent, really. Not everyone can sit in a dark room and look at numbers all day without losing their mind." "It's about the foundation, Lucy," I replied. "If the foundation is weak, the whole building falls, no matter how pretty the paint is." She didn't hear the warning. She just heard blah blah foundation. I was building a specific psychological profile of her. I knew that Lucy's greatest fear wasn't being wrong, it was looking unprepared. By making the highlights so easy for her, I ensured she would never do her own due diligence. I was giving her the rope, yard by yard, and watching her tie it into a very fashionable noose. I even started BCCing my personal email on every collaborative draft I sent her. I would include a note. "As per our session today, here is the architecture I developed for the Q3 expansion." She never corrected those emails. She was too busy moving my work into her solo folder, convinced that my lack of ego meant I was handing her my career on a silver platter. By the time the briefing was scheduled, Lucy had convinced herself that she was the brains of the operation, and I was merely the hands. She had become so conditioned to my silence that she mistook it for a vacuum. She had no idea that the vacuum was about to be filled with the weight of 500 time-stamped files. The moment was as predictable as a balance sheet. Slide 24 clicked into place on the 98-inch monitor, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The title was centered in bold navy blue. Strategic Architecture, a Solo Vision. Below it, in a slightly smaller but equally definitive font, it read, "Conceived, developed, and executed by Lucy V." The word solo didn't just sit on the screen. It mocked the months of 16-hour days I had spent in the CAD trenches. Lucy didn't skip a beat. She began a 3-minute monologue about her solitary creative process and how she had personally audited every stress test result to ensure the framework's viability. She was even using my specific metaphor, the asynchronous spine, to describe the central support column. I sat in the dim light at the back of the boardroom, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't feel a surge of adrenaline. I felt the precise, humming vibration of a trap that was finally, perfectly set. I checked my Cartier watch. 10:16 a.m. Lucy was now deep into a lie that was worth roughly $450,000 in projected annual bonuses and a senior partner track. The partners were scribbling notes, their faces illuminated by the blue light of her theft. Even the CEO, Mr. Vance, was leaning forward, visibly impressed by the narrative of the lone, high-performing lead. He looked at Lucy with the kind of respect that usually takes a decade to earn. "It's rare to see this level of technical depth from someone who also carries the strategic load," Vance said, his voice warm with unearned approval. "Lucy, this is a masterpiece of independent work." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Lucy replied, her voice steady, radiating a confidence she hadn't worked for. "I've always believed that if you want a vision to be pure, you have to be willing to bear the entire weight of it yourself." That was the line, the peak of her performance. She hadn't just stolen the work, she had attempted to erase my existence from the project entirely. She had scrubbed my name from every footer and deleted my credits from the metadata. Or so she thought. I stood up. The sound of my chair legs sliding against the hardwood was sharp and decisive. I didn't spend my weekends at the beach or at networking brunches like Lucy did. While she was busy curating her social capital, I was in the office after hours, not just working, but building an ironclad vault around my labor. I didn't prepare a defense. I prepared an autopsy. The planning began months ago, the first time Lucy referred to one of my structural breakthroughs as our little idea. I knew then that her ambition lacked a moral compass, so I made sure mine had a digital one. I utilized a third-party blockchain-based timestamping service. Every time I completed a draft, a render, or a spreadsheet, I uploaded the file's unique hash, a digital fingerprint, to an encrypted server. This created a permanent, unalterable record of exactly what I had created, down to the second. But I needed something more cinematic for the boardroom. I needed to show, not just tell. I created a specific file on my secure drive titled audit_overlay_final. It was a sophisticated piece of presentation software that allowed me to run 2 slide decks simultaneously. On the left side of the screen, it would display the original, time-stamped files I had produced in my private studio. On the right, it would capture whatever was being projected onto the main boardroom screen in real time. I designed it to highlight points of identity. If Lucy's slide shared more than 90% of its DNA with my original file, the software would glow red. It would display the date I created the file, usually weeks or months before Lucy had even joined the project. I also did a deep dive into the firm's financial software. I tracked the billable hours. I had logged 1,142 hours on this project. Lucy had logged 180, most of which were labeled Internal Strategy Coordination, a corporate euphemism for drinking coffee and talking. I calculated the cost of my labor versus her contribution. Based on our respective salaries, I was providing $285,000 worth of technical value, while she was providing a $40,000 narrative that was entirely based on my data. The most critical part of the plan was the metadata trap. I knew Lucy wasn't tech-savvy enough to look deep into the file properties. She would just copy and paste the images and the text. So, I embedded a hidden watermark in the background of my core architectural renders. It was invisible to the naked eye, but if you adjusted the contrast by 10%, my initials and the original creation date would appear across the center of the image like a digital ghost. I practiced the execution in my empty apartment, timing my walk to the front of the room. I didn't want to look angry or flustered. I wanted to look like a high-level auditor performing a routine yet devastating inspection. I also prepared a conflict summary document, a 12-page breakdown of every instance where Lucy had erased my name from a joint document. I didn't print it. I kept it as a PDF on a password-protected thumb drive that was currently sitting in my pocket, right next to my Cartier watch. I wasn't just planning to get credit. I was planning to take control. I knew that in a firm of this size, a he-said-she-said dispute over credit is a coin toss. But a side-by-side, time-stamped visual comparison of theft is an execution. The strategy was simple. Let her lie. Let her claim the solo vision. And then show the room that the vision was a stolen photograph of my reality. The walk from the back of the boardroom to the front took exactly 12 seconds. The only sound was the rhythmic, deliberate click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. I didn't rush. Rushing implies panic, and panic is for people who don't have the receipts. Lucy turned, her smile freezing into a confused grimace. We're actually in the middle of the Q&A segment, she said, her voice tight. If you have a question about the strategy, maybe we can table it for the offline sync? I don't have a question, Lucy, I said, my voice projecting clearly without raising a decibel. I have a correction. And since the error concerns the fundamental ownership of the firm's intellectual property, it cannot be tabled. I reached the podium. I didn't look at her. I placed my laptop on the lectern next to hers. With a calm, practiced motion, I disconnected her HDMI cable and plugged in my own. The screen flickered for a second, plunging the room into momentary darkness, before my audit overlay interface bloomed into existence. Mr. Vance, I said, addressing the CEO directly, ignoring the sudden murmur of confusion from the partners. What you are seeing on the right is the solo vision slide Lucy just presented. What you are seeing on the left is the original source file from my encrypted private server. I tapped a key. The screen split. On the left, my original CAD drawing appeared. It was identical to Lucy's, line for line. But there was one critical difference. A bright red box highlighted the metadata in the bottom corner. Creation date, August 14th, 0230 a.m. Author ID, my name, encrypted hash number 88492. On the right, underneath Lucy's version, the text appeared in stark contrast. Creation date, November 2nd, 9:15 a.m. Author ID, Lucy V. File modified from copy of copy. As you can see, I continued, my tone as dry as a desert, the architecture Lucy claims to have developed over a grueling 3 months was actually completed and timestamped by me exactly 92 days ago. While Lucy was, I believe, on a networking retreat in the Hamptons. Lucy stepped forward, her face flushing a deep, blotchy crimson. This is ridiculous. We collaborated. We shared files. She's taking a shared workspace and trying to— I anticipated that confusion, I interrupted, cutting through her panic with surgical precision. Which is why I prepared the watermark test. I opened the image editor on the screen, live in front of the board. I selected the central structural rendering, the asynchronous spine Lucy had been so proud of. If this is a solo vision, I said, then the base layer should be clean. I adjusted the contrast slider to -10%. Instantly, a faint, repeating pattern emerged across the background of the image. It wasn't a glitch. It was my personal digital signature, woven into the pixel density of the render itself. Property of Jessica. Do not distribute. The silence in the room was heavier than lead. Mr. Vance stood up slowly, walking toward the screen. He squinted at the watermark, then looked at Lucy. The admiration he had shown 5 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard scrutiny. But that's not all, I added, driving the final nail. I also ran a comparison of the billable hours logged against the project code. I brought up a spreadsheet. It was brutal in its simplicity. Jessica, 1,142 hours. Technical design, structural stress testing, code review. Lucy V, 180 hours. Strategy sync, client prep, narrative formatting. The data suggests a discrepancy, I said, turning to face Lucy for the first time. You claim to bear the weight of the vision alone, but according to the firm's own servers, you spent 85% of the project timeline merely formatting the work I had already completed. I turned back to the CEO. Mr. Vance, I don't mind collaboration. I thrive on it, but I do not subsidize fraud. To approve this budget based on Lucy's solo understanding of the architecture would be a liability. She cannot answer your technical questions because she didn't build the house. She just painted the front door. I unplugged my laptop. The screen went black, leaving the watermark burned into everyone's retinas. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply adjusted my cuff, ensuring my watch was perfectly aligned, and waited. I had stripped her naked in the middle of the boardroom, and I hadn't even raised my voice. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was pressurized. It felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out by the ventilation system, leaving only the cold, hard glare of the overhead lights. Lucy stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges of the lectern so tightly that her knuckles were white. The solo visionary was gone. In her place was a frantic, cornered amateur. This is a gross misrepresentation of my workflow," Lucy stammered, her voice pitching up into a defensive whine. She looked around the table, seeking eye contact with the partners she had charmed for months, but they were all looking down at their notepads or at the blank screen where the watermark had just been. "Leadership isn't about who clicked the mouse. It's about driving the narrative. I managed the stakeholder expectations. I built the story." "You built a story based on a foundation you didn't understand," Mr. Vance said quietly. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. And for a man like Vance, boredom was far more dangerous than rage. "Mr. Vance, please," Lucy continued, abandoning the podium and taking a step toward him. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. She's clearly upset that I was chosen to present. This is a retaliation tactic. She's trying to sabotage the project because she lacks the soft skills to lead. It was a desperate pivot. She was trying to frame my forensic audit as an emotional outburst. She was banking on the old corporate trope, the difficult technical woman versus the charming leader. Vance didn't take the bait. He didn't even blink. "Retaliation implies she is hurting the firm to hurt you," he said, his voice dry. "But she just saved us from a massive liability. You claimed this architecture was yours. If I had signed off on this and the structural load failed, who would I have fired? You? Or the person whose initials are hidden in the render?" Lucy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked back at me, her eyes wide and wet with panic. She was pleading for me to stop, to soften the blow, to revert to the nice collaborator role she had exploited for months. I can explain the structural load," she lied, her voice trembling. It relies on the synergy of the materials." "Synergy isn't a math term, Lucy," Vance cut in, sharp as a scalpel. "What is the tensile stress coefficient of the primary spine? Give me the number." Lucy froze. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan cooling down. She didn't know the number. She didn't even know what a tensile stress coefficient was. She had skipped that meeting to go to a networking brunch. I would need to consult my notes," she whispered, shrinking into herself. "You don't have notes," Vance said, closing his folder. "You have her notes." Mr. Vance turned his chair slowly, deliberately, away from the trembling woman at the podium. He looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but the air in the room had shifted. The spotlight that Lucy had fought so hard to monopolize was now pointing directly at the back of the room. "The tensile stress coefficient," Vance repeated, his eyes locking onto mine. "Do you have the number?" I didn't need to check my laptop. I didn't need to consult a binder. 1.45 gigapascals, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a diamond cutter. "Assuming we proceed with the titanium alloy reinforcement I specified in the budget addendum on page 42. If we switch to the cheaper steel composite Lucy suggested in the executive summary, the coefficient drops to 0.8, and the structure fails under high wind load within 5 years. Vance nodded. It was a small, decisive movement. Precise, he said. He turned back to Lucy. She looked like she had been physically struck. Her narrative had just collided with the hard concrete of engineering physics, and there were no survivors. Sit down, Lucy, Vance said. It wasn't an invitation. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her face a mask of shock. The partners, sensing the kill, had all opened their laptops, distancing themselves from the blast radius. We have a problem, Vance announced to the room. We have a project lead who cannot answer basic safety questions, and we have a support staff who is apparently holding up the entire architectural integrity of this firm. He looked at the head of HR, who was sitting near the door, typing furiously on her phone. Draft a formal memorandum of authorship correction immediately. I want the project records updated by noon. The Solo Vision branding is dead. This is now a joint project, led by the actual architect. Then he looked at me. Come to the front. I walked past Lucy. I didn't look at her. I took the seat at the head of the table, directly to Vance's right, the seat Lucy had been eyeing for 6 months. Now, Vance said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Lucy, you have 2 options. Option A, you are terminated for cause, intellectual property theft and gross misrepresentation. You leave this building with a box, and I ensure that every firm in the tri-state area knows exactly why. Lucy let out a small, strangled sob. Or, Vance continued, option B, you stay. But your title of Senior Strategic Lead is revoked. You will be reclassified as a junior associate, and you will report directly to the new project director. He gestured to me. You will work under her supervision until this project is completed. You will do the scheduling, the formatting, and the administrative grunt work. And you will sign a formal acknowledgement today admitting that the intellectual property presented on this screen belongs to her. Lucy looked up, her eyes red and pleading. Mr. Vance, please. Working under her? After this? It would be humiliating. Theft is humiliating, Lucy, I said. It was the first time I had spoken directly to her since I took the stage. My voice was soft, devoid of anger. Being caught is humiliating. Correcting the record is just administrative procedure. Vance slid a piece of paper across the table, a notepad where he had scrawled a few lines. Write it down, he commanded. I, Lucy V., acknowledge that the Q3 architectural framework was designed and executed by... Write her name. Lucy's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. The scratching sound of the ballpoint on paper was excruciatingly loud in the silent room. I watched her write my name. I watched her sign her own name below it, not as a partner, but as a subordinate. It was a total dismantling. She wasn't just losing a title. She was losing the illusion she had built her life on. She was being forced to inhabit the reality of her own incompetence. I'm sorry, she whispered, sliding the paper toward me. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I got carried away. I just wanted to show... I don't need an apology, I interrupted, picking up the paper and inspecting it as if it were a receipt for a sandwich. Apologies are for mistakes. This was a strategy. Your strategy failed. I folded the paper and placed it next to my Cartier watch. We have a synchronization meeting at 2 p.m. to discuss the revised timeline. I expect you to have the meeting minutes prepared and the coffee order taken. Do not be late. Lucy nodded, defeated. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The parasite had been excised, not by surgery, but by simply turning on the lights. Vance stood up. Meeting adjourned. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said to me. He didn't say a word to Lucy. As the room cleared, Lucy remained seated, staring at the blank screen. I packed up my laptop, secured my cables, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I had work to do, and for the first time in my career, I had a staff member to delegate the coffee run to. 6 weeks have passed since the boardroom incident. The transition wasn't smooth for Lucy, but it was incredibly efficient for the firm. I moved into the corner office with the view of the skyline, the one previously reserved for the strategic lead. Lucy was relocated to a cubicle just outside my glass door. It's a standard associate desk, gray partitions, dual monitors, and zero privacy. From my desk, I can see the back of her head as she hunches over the formatting tasks I assign her. The dynamic is clinical. Lucy no longer spends her mornings holding court in the break room or brainstorming with the partners. She spends them cross-referencing my citations and checking the pixel alignment on my slide decks. Her social capital evaporated the moment the CEO validated my receipts. In this industry, nobody wants to be seen having lunch with a liability. Yesterday, she came into my office to deliver the weekly status report. She looked tired. The designer suits have been replaced by more practical business casual attire, and the visionary sparkle in her eyes has been replaced by the dull gloss of data entry fatigue. "Here's the breakdown for the Q4 materials," she said, placing the folder on my desk. She hesitated, waiting for the praise she used to feed on. I double-checked the structural load calculations myself. I didn't look up from my monitor. "Thank you, Lucy. Please ensure the font on page 7 matches the style guide, and I'll need the client meeting minutes transcribed by 4 p.m. "Okay," she said softly. Is there anything else?" "Close the door on your way out," I replied. I watched her leave. I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. I didn't feel the urge to invite her back in for a pep talk. I felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of order being restored. Lucy is finally doing the work she is qualified for. She is no longer a parasite. She is a functional component of the machine I built. I didn't lose a partner that day in the boardroom. I gained a highly motivated assistant who knows exactly what happens when she tries to cut corners. I won't just succeed in this role. I will dominate it. And I will do it with the absolute certainty that the person checking my blind spots is the one person who knows she can never, ever cross me again. There is a dangerous lie in the corporate world that says silence is submission. People like Lucy bank on that lie. They believe that if you are quiet, you are weak. If you are collaborative, you are exploitable. They mistake professional courtesy for an open door to rob you blind. But I learned that the most powerful sound in a boardroom isn't the loudest voice. It's the sound of indisputable evidence hitting the table. If I had screamed at Lucy, I would have looked emotional. If I had complained to HR, I would have looked difficult. But by staying silent and letting the data speak, I became undeniable. Documentation is the only weapon that doesn't misfire. In a world full of storytellers and visionaries, be the person with the receipts. Be the person who timestamps the truth. Never let someone convince you that protecting your work is selfish. Your intellect is your property. Your creativity is your currency. If you don't build a fence around it, someone else will build a house on top of it. I didn't destroy Lucy because I hated her. I destroyed her comfortable lie because I respected my own truth too much to let it be erased. If you've ever had a coworker try to pass off your hard work as their solo vision, hit that like button. It helps us find more people who need to hear this. And I want to know in the comments, what is your strategy for dealing with credit stealers? Do you confront them immediately, or do you wait until you have the digital receipts to expose them? Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We are building a community of people who know that while the thief might get the applause, The architect owns the building. See you in the next story.